Mullingar has been noted for many things, the arts, especially our singers, Joe Dolan, Brezzy and Niall Horn. It's also noted as a town that was once a garrison town. But Mullingar was also known for one other thing. As a county town of Westmeath, it was known as a town where justice was served on people, including that of executions. But when we speak about executions, many people here in Mullingar would straight away think of Brian Seary, an innocent man who was executed in 1846 for the attempted murder of Sir Francis Hopkins. But Brian was not the last man to be executed in Mullingar. We then roll forward 40 years to January 1886, and we see that the last man executed here in what was Mullingar Jail, which is now the county buildings for Westmeath County Council, was actually John Cronin from Longford. So who was the last person to be executed in Mullingar, or even who were the last people to be executed in Mullingar? It was actually in 1923, at the height of the Irish Civil War. Michael Greally, aged 27, from Curragh-Roscramogue in County Roscommon, and Luke Burke, aged 26, from Cady, County Armagh. Both men had served during 1916. Both men during the War of Independence had fought in their own areas. On the 11th of July 1921, the Irish War of Independence came to a cessation, a ceasefire of sorts. This was to allow the British government hold talks with the leadership of the Republican movement in Ireland. By the 6th of December 1922, a treaty had been signed, but not a treaty that many members of the IRA or Sinn Féin or any form of republicanism would accept. This division was copper-fastened when the IRA split on the issue of the Anglo-Irish Treaty at an army convention in March 1922. Many of those volunteers of the IRA also split. Those that accepted the treaty went into what is called the pro-treaty IRA, later called the National Army. And those against the treaty, of course the anti-treaty members of Gaeltacht na hÉireann, were termed by the new provisional government as irregulars. And it was with this that Michael Greally and Luke Burke now saw themselves on the opposite side of many of their comrades. A republic or nothing is what these men believed, and they were ready to fight and die for it. But war is an expensive issue, and with this, while the provisional government was accepting money from the British government and weapons and indeed barracks, the anti-treaty IRA couldn't fall back in this. And it was with this that raids on banks and other locations of finance was ordered. However, this was not popular with the local population, and we see that by March 1923 that the senior command of the anti-treaty IRA decided to cessate all forms of bank robberies and raiding on financial institutions. However, in Oldcastle, Michael Greally and Luke Burke, it is not known if this order from the senior command reached Oldcastle at this stage. But on the 27th of February 1923, both Luke Burke and Michael Greally and two other unknown men turned a plan to raise funds into reality. Both men were found in their possession of £385, 10 old shillings and 11 pence, composing of notes, silver, coppers and 108 sovereigns. However, and importantly, no weapons were found on either man. Both Michael Greally and Luke Burke, now having been arrested by the National Army, at Colin Barracks they were incarcerated in a military prison at the rear of the barracks to await trial. This military prison, constructed to the older designs of the 18th century, is similar to that of the old west wing of Commemorating Jail in Dublin. It is a cold, dreary place, totally bereft of any form of modern comforts, even for the early 1920s. It consists of 2 floors with a total of 18 cells, each with tiny windows to let in some sort of light, and 2 rooms upstairs which the prison guards are located. As one views these rooms, one could come to the conclusion that these 2 rooms with bars and hooks suspended from their ceilings also doubled up with something more sinister. Indeed, today, the old military prison, which still survives, could be described as Mullingar's very own Commemorating jail. Both Michael Greally and Luke Burke were tried by court-martial under the Army Emergency Powers Resolution and Public Safety Resolution of 1922. Wednesday, the 28th of February 1923, both men were found guilty and sentenced to death by firing squad, and it was to take place within the confines of Column Barracks. They now found themselves in what was technically, as we would know, as death row. However, almost 2 weeks later, at around 10:30 at night of Monday, the 12th of March 1923, a number of knocks were received on the door. It was time for a heartbreaking message to be presented to each man, with each of them being informed that they were to be executed within hours, with the time set at 8 a.m. the next morning. Both men began to write letters to their loved ones and to those that were important to them. In their last letters to their families and friends, both men spoke of their service to Ireland as members of Óglaigh na hÉireann, the IRA, with Michael Greally pointedly stating that they would die as true soldiers of the Republic, dying true to our oath, true to Ireland and true to the dead. Luke Leo Burke, writing his final letter to his fiancée, Lily Robinson, also expressed his strong Irish republicanism and informs her, "I am very happy and glad to die as a soldier of the Republic." There was no doubt in either man's minds that they were dying for Ireland. It was on a dreary Wednesday morning, the 13th of March, and Captain Michael Greally and Adjutant Luke Burke attended their final mass that morning. While there may be no surviving records outlining what actually happened and what the makeup was of that firing party, one only has to look to Dr. Ian Keneally's research regarding the executions at nearby Custom Barracks the previous January. And this indicates that it was common for small groups of prisoners, approximately in twos or threes, to be executed together as opposed to one at a time. What is worth noting at this time is that before each man was executed, having been arrested, they had previously given false names. However, just before their execution, both men provided the real names. Reports issued by Army headquarters in Dublin state that two men executed in Mullingar named Henry Keenan from Newcastle, County Down, and Michael Greally from Athenry, Galway, had now clarified the situation and provided the real names, with the names of Luke Burke being that of Harry Keenan and Michael Greally being that of Michael Greally. It would be another while before these men's names would be brought to attention around the country. Having been executed, the soldiers of the National Army now brought the bodies of both men to the hospital block, where the military doctors checked to ensure that both men were dead. Having been confirmed that they were now dead, it was decided now that both men would be buried within the confines of Column Barracks. This was the height of the Civil War, and the National Army and the Irish government did not want any propaganda to be made out of Republican funerals. So therefore the bodies were not to be handed over to their families and loved ones. While it's accepted that both men were buried to the rear of the hospital block in the barracks, many years later some soldiers have stated that anecdotally they heard that the remains of the men were buried in the grounds just outside Chelsea House and the Garrison Church. However, whichever is true doesn't really matter, because this was not to be their final resting place. Over a year later, on the 5th of July 1924, the Meath Chronicle reported at the sports grounds in Mullingar of a large Republican commemoration, which included a concert, sporting activities that took place in honour of those from Westmeath who had fallen in the fight for Irish freedom since 1916. It was further stated that Mr. M.J. Kennedy read aloud the Westmeath martyrs' roll of those killed in action as members of Óglaigh na hÉireann. Amongst the names within the martyrs' roll were the names of Michael Greally and Luke Burke, with the company heading "were executed while operating within the area." The fact that the phrase "operating within the area" on this Westmeath martyrs' roll underpins that both men were very much recognised by Republicans as being active volunteers within Óglaigh na hÉireann. By October 1924, with the Civil War now over, the Free State government, under pressure from the public and especially from the families of those executed, ordered that all bodies would be exhumed from government property and returned to their families, with the caveat that this would be low-key and not to be used as propaganda by Republicans. The government set the date for Tuesday, the 28th of October 1924 for the handing over of the remains of the 81 official executions, which included those of Michael Greally and Luke Burke. It is reported that on Wednesday, the 29th of October 1924, Commandant D.V. Skehan, Quartermaster, No. 6 Brigade, writing from Collin Barracks, Mullingar, informed the superiors at Collins's barracks in Dublin that the remains of Luke Burke were handed over yesterday to his brother John and Peter, and also those of Michael Greally to his family. He concludes by stating that the soldiers on guard duty in Collin Barracks turned out and paid their respects to the remains of each executed man as he left the barracks for one final time. Indeed, the Adjutant General's headquarters at Parkgate Street in Dublin reports the handing over the bodies of Luke Burke and Michael Greally under the important heading of handing over of the remains of executed irregulars. Once again, it's very clear that the Free State military authorities deem both men as being operational members of the anti-treaty IRA, Ogleg, Nahiran. The funerals that were now held for both men were so different. The Roscommon Herald, dated on the 1st of November 1924, informs its readers with the heading, "An execute County Roscommon man, the late Captain Michael Greally, IRA, Scaramog public funeral," that the exhumation and handover of the remains of Captain Michael Greally to his brother Malachy took place. The funeral mass, led by 8 priests, was held the following Wednesday morning at 11:30 at Corrow Chapel, County Roscommon, with his burial taking place at Clontuskert Cemetery to the sorrowful music of the Boyle Brass Band. It was also noted that a guard of honour of volunteers from Cumann and Sinn Féin stood by the coffin of Captain Michael Greally as his comrades of the IRA fired a volley of shots over his flag-draped coffin. But when we look at Luke Burke, while he was also respected by his comrades in a similar manner to an extent, it has to be noted that he was being buried in Cady, County Armagh, which was now part of Britain, which is now termed Northern Ireland. Luke's remains were discreetly buried under lamplight in the middle of the night, and he was placed in an unmarked grave, so his remains would remain untouched forever. In 1932, 9 years after the ending of the Civil War, change was in the air, and the outgoing Irish government of Cumann Gael, led by William T. Cosgrave, having been defeated at the polls at the general elections of that year, was now to be replaced by Eamon de Valera and his Fianna Fáil party. The outgoing government of Cumann Gael had a lot to fear now, with their now former fellow Civil War enemies now about to take government in the new Irish state. The possibility that Fianna Fáil would now have access to files and other incriminating documents from the Civil War period that had led to the deaths of many of their comrades was something that was to be greatly feared by the outgoing government. It was with this in mind that on the 7th of March 1932 that a destruction order was issued by the Irish Free State government. And this was to ensure that all files and documents related to executions during the Irish Civil War was to be burnt, destroyed. And it's with this that many of the documents of the court-martial, the burial records, etc. of Michael Greally and Luke Burke were lost forever. By the 1930s, the families of Michael Greally and Luke Burke now decided to make applications for pensions and other financial compensation. However, as both men were deemed to have robbed banks and raided banks in Oldcastle, which was felt that was not due to an official order by their senior command, these pensions were refused. There is a lot of ambiguity today about who gave the order to rob these banks in Oldcastle. But that's not for us to discuss at this moment in time. Something worse was about to happen to both men, was the fact that both men were now to be termed as civilian bank robbers and not as members of the anti-treaty IRA and definitely not as officers of the Irish Republic. This was a bitter blow to the families and to the memories of both men. If there was ever to be an irony to this tragic circumstances, is that the new Minister for Defence was none other than Fianna Fáil TD and former IRA Chief of Staff Frank Aiken. But it appears that this mattered little now in the 1930s. It became very clear to the families of Michael Greally and Luke Burke that they were to be disregarded by the Irish state and just to be viewed as mere civilians. Out of the 81 official executions by the Free State government during the Civil War, 4 executions are recorded being that of civilians. 2 of these carried out in Tuam Barracks, and the latter 2 are that of Michael Greally and Luke Burke, executed in Colin Barracks, Mullingar. This has cast a dark shadow over the executions of Luke Burke and Michael Greally. As a historian, as someone who has actually spent time in military archives, and for the remaining files and documents that survive of both men, I have seen clearly that these men were referred to as members of the IRA, Óglaigh na hÉireann. Today, one may suggest, with the fading of old Civil War politics mindset, that any further research or investigation into the case would witness the findings being viewed through a more compassionate and justice-seeking lens of modernity. When we think back to Michael Greally and Luke Burke, let's think of who they were and the times they were in. Let's not just put on the lens of 1923, let's put on the compassionate lens of 2023 as we conclude this decade of Centenary.